Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed yesterday evening, and it was still nice weather yesterday. But now I think it's becoming more cold. But at least we have been very lucky with the weather during the first 3 days. My name is Henning Steen Hansen, and I am professor at this university and organizer of this Inspire conference. We have 5 presentations, and there's allocated 15 minutes to each sharply until I change my mind. Because at the moment I have only received 3 presentations. So I will just please raise your hand, the presenters here. You, and you. So it seems that probably we will only have 3 presentations. So, and that's the reason why I probably will change my mind regarding the time allocated to you. So you can, I think. Okay, there's.
Maybe it's someone else. The last one.
Okay, is your name?
Yes, but it's a mistake.
Okay, sorry for that.
No, it's not. Maybe it's someone else who talks to this.
To have the same name?
No, the same name. No.
Okay,
but
yeah. Okay, but thank you for informing me. But still, there's only 3 presenters at the moment here. Yeah, let me see here, it was. Yeah, so we can spend a little more than 15 minutes if you need it, and at the end then we can have a little more room for discussion. Because open data is one of my favorite research items, so I think it could be quite nice to some discussion on that issue. The first speaker is Carlo Cipollini. Is he here? No, it was not. Then I probably have to just check it. Sorry for the confusion. Yeah, it's this is. Oh, I hate that program.
I'm the first presenter here. This is the section.
Number 4. Thursday at 9.
Yeah.
Oh, this was 11. Yes. Okay. Here it is. Yes. Sorry for my confusion, but I was quite convinced that to remember that it was Van Lonen who should be the first speaker, but then I looked on the wrong session. But once again, welcome to everybody, and I will give the floor to the first speaker, Bastiaan van Leunen, who will talk about the value of open geographical data. Solely. Inspire as enabler of open data. Welcome, and the floor is yours, please. No, it's on the. You can just close down that one, and then Bastiaan van Leunen.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, all of you just come in. You're not late, we're just starting. My name is Bastiaan van Loenen at the Delft University of Technology, and I co-authored the paper together with Michel Grote from GeoNovum. And it's all about Inspire and the role of Inspire in meeting open data objectives. The starting point for this presentation, or the paper we've written, is a little frustration from outside that few people outside the Geo community realize that the Inspire directive and the principles of Inspire are also important for meeting open data objectives. I'm also a member of the legal aspects of Public Sector Information 2.0 project, which is aiming at overcoming legal barriers in the PSI domain. And there I mentioned, well, many of these legal barriers are addressed by Inspire, and then they said last year, Inspire, what is Inspire? That was their response. Now they're more or less aware of what Inspire is, and I also noticed that a lot of people in the Geo community do not really realize what the value of Inspire is for arriving at the ultimate open data world. If you're looking at open data or the PSI directive, there is one objective there, that's the single objective, to promote the reuse of public sector information. If you're looking at promoting reuse, this is the little model we're using always with promoting reuse, meeting user needs. The user needs first to know that the data exists. If he doesn't know the data exists, forget about it, he will not use it. Then he needs to know where to find it. If he doesn't know where to go, forget it, the data will not be used. That's the first circle. Then he moves into the second circle. The data should be attainable. That means the data should be available and affordable, we can call it. If the price is too high, the user will not use the data. If the user's conditions are too restrictive, the user will not use the data. And then finally it comes into the center, where it's all about technical aspects. Data should be up to date. He should be able to assess the data through the metadata, etc. Only when the user is going through these circles and is able to go through these circles, then he will use the data. So now we'll assess the PSI directive and compare it with the Inspire directive and see to what extent they meet the user needs. So first, the first circle, the known, recognizable, and findable. If you look at the PSI directive, and I'm talking now here about the PSI directive 2003, but also the amended one, of course, you'll see here that they do not really address this issue. It says should make practical arrangement facilitating the search for documents available for reuse, accessible where possible and appropriate. Well, that's an escape there to make these lists. Where possible, member states have facilitate the cross-linguistic search for the documents. That's nice, but it is only there where possible. Well, Inspire simply says, no, once the dataset is part of the Inspire data themes, it should be published in the Geo portal, the Inspire Geo portal, and also in the national Geo portals, if that's a choice you've made in your implementation process. So here, Inspire is much more directive and much more towards meeting the user requirements. You can also look at the attainability part, de facto accessibility. So how do I get to the data? PSI directive doesn't really mention it at all. While Inspire says, no, you have to publish the data actively through the network services. So discovery, viewing, downloading. And not only that, it also says, requires that the data should be performing according to the requirements of the 979/2009 regulation. So 24/7 performance for 90% of time, etc. So here, broken links, for example, will be addressed by Inspire, not by the PSI directive. You can also take a look at the legal aspects. Well, the new PSI directive says if the documents are available for access, if you can access the documents, then also should be available for reuse. That's a big step compared to the previous one. It says also that the data should be accessible through a license. It promotes open license, so it says, well, you better use only attribution at the max, but it doesn't require it to do so. Inspire says, well, the data should be actively accessible through the network services. Doesn't require anything about open licenses, but there is some rules, and I understood yesterday that the Inspire revision will specifically look at the data sharing rules that need to be updated. But Inspire is not so strong in this part. If you talk about affordable data, PSI directive, new one, is very strict on that, and only the marginal cost of dissemination, unless you have a very good reason to charge more, and that is very much limited. The rule is marginal cost of dissemination. While Inspire, you all know, discovery services, view services for free, and download services, pretty much there is no limitation there. Very wide. So here you can say PSI directive is more towards meeting the user needs than the Inspire directive. If you then go into the usable circle, some issues here, quality issues that, at least from our research, users very much appreciate, is adequate metadata, up-to-date data, complete data, open formats, machine readable, and help desk. Not much mentioned, but a lot of users like to have contact with the provider. Looking at metadata, well, it should not be a surprise to you. PSI directive, it's mentioned, metadata, but again there is the escape where possible and appropriate. And what metadata documentation really is, it's not specified. How to do it, not specified at all. Well, you know, all know Inspire is very detailed in requirements for metadata. Very specific, standardized metadata documentation for data and services. Services not addressed in the PSI directive. If you look at up-to-date data, which is highly appreciated by users, sorry, PSI directive does not address that. If you look at the Inspire, well, you have this requirement for updates for every 6 months, so the latest version, at the latest 6 months after it's been published, should be available through Inspire, which is still late, but at least it's mentioned that there should be an up-to-date version available for use. You then look at complete data, so users prefer to have full coverage of a certain jurisdiction, not 200 data sets for one jurisdiction. You have to access, require the data from 200 institutes and then link the data together and integrate it yourself. They want to have complete full coverage of the data set. PSI directive, not addressed. PSI directive does address that the data should be available at the best level of precision and granularity. But they only address that in the recital, so in the considerations and not in the text of the directive. So quality is addressed, and when you're looking at that specific recital, they're referring there, it's the only place they're referring to Inspire. You better look at Inspire, how they're doing it over there, and maybe then you can learn and see if it's also appropriate for you to use that for your own PSI. Inspire, well, does not require more data than you already have. So also here, Inspire does not cover this requirement, but the requirements for the data harmonization should enable at least the cross-border interoperability of Inspire datasets, although that's something we should work on. I'll come back to that later. Open formats, machine readable, that's the thing that PSI directive is addressing. Again, here we have the escape with where possible and appropriate, but the PSI directive promotes open formats and machine readable. Inspire is not so much on the open formats, but interoperable datasets, well, that's all what we're working on. And if they're not machine readable, the whole Inspire will collapse and fail. So that's implicitly embedded in the Inspire directive. Help desk. Both directives don't address help desks. So if you look at from a summary perspective here, Inspire plays a major role in the first circle, where the PSI directive is pretty much absent. In the second one, a PSI directive is important by requiring active publication of the dataset through the network services, while the PSI directive is also silent there. But PSI directive is favoring reusers because they're having such a limit on the price of the data. In the center, the usability, metadata is of course the key of the Inspire part. Data harmonization, specifications, and also PSI is rather silent on that, except for the open formats and machine readability requirements. So you can see here, both Inspire and PSI directive are key for reusers to use the data. So in conclusion, so my presentation is short, you're half an hour you were allowing me to talk. The three equally important factors here for reusers: the data should be known, the data should be attainable, and the data should be usable. And Inspire contributes through the required publication in portals, through the required access through network services, to the standardized metadata, and also, of course, to the up-to-date information, well, which can be updated more than that. But it's a key issue here that meets the reusers' needs. So that's why we are, Michel and I are promoting this these Inspire principles and requirements to the ELAPSI group to say what Inspire has accomplished, or the principles of Inspire should be extended to more than just geodata. And that's highly desirable from a reuser standpoint. Over this conference, yesterday I was in the Law and Order meeting with Peter Daak. Maybe he's in the room now. He had an excellent presentation about why Inspire should not stop where it's now. Went to do the same thing. He addressed a lot of issues that appear when you have cross-boundary data integration and service integration and complete failure. Please go look at his presentation. It was yesterday in the Law and Order session. Very interesting, and there's a long way to go for Inspire, but there is even a longer way for the PSI directive and open data to go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Van Leunen. And you were very sharp on time. Any questions from the audience? At least I wanted one thing. It was regarding the use of this circle. I cannot remember the name of the author of. You said, for example, that the PSI directive was not concerned about completeness, and it was regarding the same for Inspire directive, just as an example. But I think we should consider what is the aim of the PSI directive. It is not to have completeness of data. It is that you should be able to that public sector information should be available for reuse. And if the data does not exist, you cannot so then it's, I think, a bit out of scope of the directive.
Well, it depends how you look at it. If you look at it from a perspective of the reuser, and he is able to reuse the data and make a nice product out of the public sector information, then you better look at his needs. And one of the needs that appears from our research is that reusers are not waiting for bits and pieces of data sets, and they may add value to that by integrating it into one single data set, but that's such a big effort that they will never recover the cost of that by selling the product in the end. Mm-hmm. So ideally, they would prefer to have one data set for the full coverage of the nation. Yeah. But it's ideally. Yeah. And there's always the discussion whether the, I don't know how to say that in English, whether public sector public institutes should throw the data over the hedge or should add value themselves and then enable the reuser. There's a big discussion on that. I don't have the answer, but probably throwing it over the hedge is not enough from the government side.
That's correct in a way from a user perspective.
Yeah.
And of course, it is also painful for me as a researcher when I am looking for some data and okay, it's not available for the whole country or for the whole region or for the same year, for example. So you can have many problems in that. But in a way, I still think that the two directives are step forwards. But also, as you stated in the presentation you referred to at the end, that the directive we have just implemented in a way is just a start, and we should look forward to Inspire 2 or 3 or what else. And then I'm also sure that the economic crisis has put a lower ambitions toward the Inspire implementation in Europe.
Yeah, but when I was really in a shock yesterday after seeing this presentation of Peter. I mean, Inspire, well, sure, it's okay to update or improve your national spatial data infrastructure. That's what's happening now, and Inspire is a big step to improving your own national SDI. But in the end, we want to have the European SDI. And if you look at this presentation, there's many steps to take before we are in the European SDI advanced levels.
Yeah, I agree fully, and I never believe that we will have the same level in the whole Europe, because some countries will always be a step behind. That's my... Yeah. I can come with the microphone to you.
Thank you. Anyone who's done an EU project will understand why I am compelled to say this. I apologize, but I have to get my dissemination things in. LAPSI is one of the, Phil Archer, W3C, is one of the projects looking at this, and it's a really important one. And LAPSI is doing a joint workshop with another thematic network called Share PSI, which I coordinate. You may not know this, Bastian, we haven't met, but in December we're going to be in Lisbon together, doing a workshop together, picking up on what you're saying about how we have a workshop very soon on efficiency, use of government data for greater efficiency. But on the December one in Lisbon, we're going to be looking at how you encourage outside developers. Now, the legal aspects are very important in that, but so are the technical aspects in making that metadata available and where does it cover and everything else. So we've got a couple of days on that. So look out for information on that from LAPSI or from Share PSI. It should be a good event. And do your Christmas shopping in Lisbon.
Thank you very much.
I'm Saulius Urbanas from Eurogeographics. Actually, I share what your colleague mentioned, that Inspire is mainly dealing with the requirements for the national SDIs. There's a very little that Inspire has done, actually almost nothing has done for making European spatial data infrastructure. But that was addressed actually by national mapping cadastral authorities, and that's why we have a European location framework, so where we try to bring the data together. And I dare to say that I don't think that you're right, so that in one day we'll have a seamless Europe. So because we are developing automated geo tools for making edge matching between different scales and different level of details from national contributions. So it means that there are technical approaches to achieve the seamless Europe, but of course that will take time, takes efforts, takes money, so quite much to do. But the concept is there. So if you haven't visited yet the ELF stand, so I encourage you to come. So we have already the showcase demo of the first year, so which demonstrates certain interoperability. But that will come, of course, much more later.
Thank you for your comment. I'll just add one thing, because I believe when you are considering Annex 1 data that I think this is probably, but Annex 3 data, it's totally confusing, and probably even digital elevation model have a high quality for the whole Europe. It's pops out of scope. Yeah, one final question to Bastian van Leunen's presentation? That's not the case?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Good to see you.
Hi, Bastian. You mentioned that Inspire doesn't address open formats, but GML is an open format, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Is that in the regulations that it's explicitly mentioned that you need to use GML, or is it only in the guidelines?
Yeah.
So, well, that's a good point. It is also what is the status of the guidelines? From a legal perspective, there is not a status, but in fact, if you want to fulfill the requirements of the regulations, you have to follow the guidelines. So, that's a good point.
There's one last question from you.
Thank you. Andrea Pergo from Jersey. No, just a couple of comments though, about activities maybe relevant to the topics that has been presented. One is that there is, probably you already know, but there is some collaboration between Inspire and the ISA program of the European Union, which is meant to support cross-sector interoperability. Part of the work is about access control, for instance, in the framework of one of the actions called ARENA, Reusable Inspire Reference Platform. We had a workshop on that. But there is also some work underway in the ISA program, and we are having actually a presentation from Leda Bargiotti. There's a reporting work done by DG Connect about a survey they did about the licenses used in data portals in Europe. So, okay, fortunately, she came just the last moment, so we're not able to include her presentation in this session. But what we are trying to do, at least from the Jersey side, is to understand as much as possible the synergies between the work done in the framework of the PSI directive and Inspire. The other point is probably more related to the part about the last question, is that there is also work underway about making more, let's say, machine readable the specification of the conditions for access and use and limitation for public access in Inspire metadata. So, I mean, there is something moving towards this. It's important to maybe coordinate some efforts to understand better the requirements. Thank you.
Very much. I think we should move forward to the next speaker, and once again, thanks Peter van Leunen for an interesting and not at least stimulating presentation, because he received a lot of feedback, so that's really nice. The next speaker is, you're already here, but I cannot, Tinus van Kolding, who will talk about the value of open geographical data, the Danish case, from our National Geodata Agency. And your presentation should be there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
So we are changing the subject a little bit, maybe, but at least the data that I'm going to talk about today is included in the Inspire data, the Danish Inspire data. Okay, so my name is Tinus van Kolding, and I'm from the Danish Geodata Agency, and I would like to talk a little bit about the value of open geographical data in the Danish case. So in 2012, the Danish government and the local government of Denmark made a common strategy, and including in that strategy was the Basic Data Program. And you can say that this is one of the great benefits of the financial crisis. There's a lot of bad things about financial crisis, but a financial crisis also put a pressure on the system, and it put a pressure on people to cooperate in new ways. And that was what we saw here. For many, many times, Torben Hansen is here, we have tried to opening up data in Danish context, and it have failed every time. But this time we succeeded, partly because of the financial crisis. But the Basic Data Program in Denmark is about making public data available to users, so that the data that we use in the public sector again and again and again, they should be put forward to the users. So this is direct in line with the PSA directive that Bastian was talking about. So included in the basic data program is information about individuals, businesses, real properties, addresses, roads and areas, and maps and geography. And I'll mainly talk about roads, areas, maps and geography, because that is what is included in the Danish Geodata Agency. So the data that we are talking about is topographical data, it's a digital elevation model, it's cadastral information, it's auto photos, and here's another representation of the digital elevation model. So what we managed to do in Denmark, which is probably a little bit different from opening up data process in other countries, is that we managed, together with the Minister of Finance sitting at the end of the table, we managed to make a positive business case of opening up data. This is quite unique, and this has been a good driver for the whole opening up data process. So you could see that open data in Denmark is a kind of an investment, at least seen from the Minister of Finance point of view. So what they expected was growth in the private sector, linked back to the financial crisis, and a more effective public sector. And it's not like the Minister of Finance, they are paying for everything. No, we have an agreement with the public sectors, and they are still paying for access to the data, but the private sector do not any longer have to pay for data. But in order to meet that cost, the public sector has to be more effective. So it means that the Geodata Agency's budget is still the same, so we can still maintain the good quality of the data that we have, which is an requirement for actually opening up the data from our side of the table. But the private sector no longer have to pay. So we are reimbursed by the Minister of Finance because we are now getting a more effective public sector. So there was a lot of expectation before opening up the data 1st of January 2013. Børsen, Danish financial magazine, said treasure to be found in open cadastral map, version 2. They're talking about joy over government data bonanza, breakthrough with open access to cadastral business register and cadastral numbers. And Berlingske, growth adventure waits for Danish enterprises. So there were quite huge expectations. But when you make a business case with the Minister of Finance, I could say when you make a deal with the devil, you have to pay eventually. But that may not be very nice, because they have actually been very good and cooperative in this collaboration. So I'm not saying that. But at least when you make a business case with the Minister of Finance, you know eventually that you will have to show whether that business case came through. The expectation that were in the Danish data program, growth in the private sector, efficiency in the public sector, are we meeting that? So in the Geodata Agency, we decided to measure the effect. And the way we thought about it was we need some baseline data, because when you're opening up data, you expect that a lot of things will happen. When you have a payment and data, you have a very limited user group, mainly the private sector and the public sector with the geo nerds, but you know the user and you know the usage, kind of. So we illustrate that in 2012 with a bonsai tree. We had registered users because they had to pay. We had good knowledge about the users. But when you open up data, you expect that many new users, completely new branches, private people, a lot of new people and usage will take place. So we illustrate that with a kind of a rainforest. So how do you measure the difference? That is quite difficult. It's not an easy task. So we asked Deloitte to help us with making the study. And what is important for us was to have a baseline, because that was what we thought the best way of making an effect study in 2016. But at the same time, we are in a community. A lot of new users are taking up geodata, partly because of Google, but also just because that is the way the world is going. So how do we differentiate between what is the natural involvement in the market and the spread of the use of geodata, and what is actually the effect of opening up the data? So we can see what we want to measure and what we have to show the Minister of Finance eventually is the difference. So Deloitte started up the study last year. So they came up with an analytical design. And the content of the analytical design was that you have to have a changed theory. So when you open up data, what is actually going to happen? Then you have to look at the value chain. So what kind of value is added in the different change. And then you have a data strategy. How do you actually collect the information? Who do you have to ask? How do you go about it? And the very important thing was that we make the baseline in 2012, where we used the analytical design, and then we're making a post-measurement in 2016, and then eventually we'll make the effect of open data study. So the change theory that Deloitte came up with was that we have open data, and we expect that there will be an effect on demand. I don't know if you can see the text down there. I don't really know. Yes? No response? No? You can see it? Yeah? Okay. But the effect on the demand is that we've had an increased demand from existing customers. So when you remove the barrier of payment, people will use it probably more often. Then you will have an increased demand from new customers, which is what we really would like to see. And then you have an increased demand from companies in other industries, which is also very, very interesting when we take the growth perspective into the picture. Then you have an effect on production. So we expect to see new products or services from existing companies, and we can confirm that that is already happening very fast in Denmark. You have an increase in new companies. We have a representative from Septima sitting down here somewhere, down there, yeah. So we have new companies as well, and lower prices on existing products. And then, of course, we hope that it has a profound effect on users. So in the public sector, as I mentioned, it should have an effect on efficiency. We hope to see new self-service workflows and solutions, better decision-making in public administration. In the private sector, efficiency, workflow, higher productivity. Again, better decision-making and lower prices. And we can, what I think is interesting that we can already see now in the private sector. Of course, we see some new products, we see some new companies, but a lot of the companies have actually used this open access to the data to make their own internal workflow more effective, which I think is very, very interesting. And then we have the effect on consumers and citizens, lower prices, increased purchasing power, and increased transparency. In Denmark, we haven't focused so much on the increased transparency. When you talk about open data in a European perspective, we usually talking about growth, efficiency, and transparency. In Denmark, we like to think that we are already very transparent, so that hasn't been the focus. But I still think there is a little bit to learn from that as well. And then we have the socioeconomic effect, increase in GDP and increase in welfare, time saved, lesser pollution, better health, and so forth. The welfare economics is not really included in the study, but I'll get back to that later on. And then we have the value change approach. So we as a data provider provide the data to companies that make data enrichment, that make services and different solutions, to eventually to the end users. So the information that we had already in place in 2012 was who was using which type of data, and so we wanted to know more about. On the other side of the chain, or the next chain, was how was the data used? What was the size of the geodata market? What is the real economics effect on productivity? And then again, we would have liked to know more about what is the welfare economic effects. But as I said, the last part is not really included in this study, but that will be addressed separately. So the way that Deloitte went about in the data collection, in the data strategy, was to use the statistics from the Danish Geodata Agency, and then they made some in-depth interviews with key respondents from the public sector and the private sector, respectively. And based on that, they made two different surveys, one in the public sector and one in the private sector, but all within the existing users. So when we opened up the data, or maybe I should just, No, that's okay. So when we opened up the data, before opening up, we had 800 users, and for larger countries, this may not seem as much, but Denmark is a small country, so to us that was the GeoNerd community, we can say. So after opening up, 1 year after, we had 10,000 users, and again, that may not be so much, but if you look at the percentage, it's quite remarkable. And the statistics that is not included in this, some of you may have heard about Minecraft and open data into Minecraft, and that has completely boosted the number of users, but we will not get into that. But what we did when we opened up the data, which is probably important to say here, is that we decided to register the users. There's a lot of discussion going on in different groups whether you should register the users when you open up or whether you should not do it, because that would be a barrier to people using the data. And we decided to do it because we wanted as much as possible to follow the users, so we still have in contact with the users, so we know what kind of needs they have in terms of our solutions, our data and distribution methods. And I should say, we have not had one single complaint about registering the users. They only have to give a name. They can say Donald Duck if they want, but they have to give an email, and they have to say whether they are a private person or public. They're working at a public agency, which have allowed us to go back already now to make some different surveys among the new users. So that seems to work out pretty well. So what happened? This is a diagram showing the web map services going from 2005, including 2013. So you remember the two lines I showed you about with the bonsai tree and the rainforest. We have had a kind of a steady curve coming up from 2009 up to 2012, and then suddenly it changed. And at least you should always be careful about making cause relationships, but at least we think there is a clear relationship between the increased uses of our web map services and opening up the data. So who are the new users? A lot of them are citizens. Again, the transparency part is probably shouldn't be underestimated. Then we have 24% private sector, and again, if you add it up to the 10,000 users, that is 2,400 new users in the private sector, which I think is promising in terms of the growth perspective. We have 6% in the public sector, and then you may say, why is that? Because the public sector already used to have access to our data. But what we found was accessibility, like you just addressed again in your figure. The data should be usable, they should be accessible. So what we did when we opened up the data, we say, okay, the new users, they may not know much about VMTS or VMS services or FTP download. So we made a download solution with this normal buying module on the internet. So people can just go in and click when they are registered, say, okay, I want this data set over to your buying basket, and then off you go, you have the data. So a lot of these new users in the public sector may be old user or new users that just suddenly actually have accessibility or have better accessibility to the data. And then we have the last percentages of the NGOs. And the companies, if we look at the great growth perspective, consultancy, IT may not be such a surprise that there are a lot of usage in this sector. But what we found was that in the beginning, it was more the normal users. They expanded it. They made them companies more efficient internally. New products, some new company came in. But what we are seeing now, also probably inspired by the Minecraft story, is that now the maturity is coming in. People are using the data in a much more intelligent and funny way. One of the new examples is that the Danish Naturstyrelsen, environmental agency, is going together with a private company and some other developers to say, okay, can we make environmental impact assessment and official hearings, can we make them more intelligent and interesting so people will actually participate? Again, back to the transparency issue. So that is a completely new way of saying, okay, we put the digital elevation model into a gaming program which makes it accessible for completely new user groups, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at the world. Construction is new. They used to use it, but in the end of the value chain. And what we see now is that the data is moving into the initial decision phase. And it's using in the BIM and a lot of other areas that we know will explode within the next few years. And then we have information communities and utilities, which used to be some of our key customers. So what are the barriers? We asked Deloitte to look at what barriers there have been in terms of using the data. So accessibility and distribution is still an issue. When you have new users, it's not the GeoNerd community I'm talking about here or the normal users, but the new users where we really expect to see the efficiency taking place and the growth taking place. They need to have the data in a way that they can actually understand it and use it. We're having this picture of IKEA. When you go to IKEA, there are two types of users in our world. You have the one that knows exactly what kind of couch you want. It has to be blue, and you know exactly where to put it in your living room, and you already have a truck, so you can take the couch with you and off you go. You're the GeoNerd community. But when you have the new users, you going into the showroom in the IKEA, you don't just go through the back door. You have to go through the whole IKEA business, looking at all the different furnitures and in various colors, and you have to have them shown how do they fit together with other furnitures and so forth. So people need to have data in an accessible format, and they have to see it in a different way that we are used to. Then we have the users. There's some capacity and knowledge both in the public and the private sector. How do we actually, now we have this nice package or present from the Minister of Finance, but how do we actually use these data? There is still some maturity to be taken in and some education in both sectors. Then we have market insecurity. How far as a data distributor do we go? Some private companies state that they may not have made as great investments as they had planned to, because they are not really sure whether the Geodata Agency suddenly starts to make solutions and encroach on their area. I think that was there before. It is still there, and probably we can't avoid it. But what we can try to is to make it very clear what we have in the pipeline. So what is our plan for the next 2 or 3 years? That should make it pretty clear for the private sector, so they don't feel that they should withhold their investments. And then we have a lacking release of other data, which I think is a good sign. When the private companies and also people in the public sector starts to talk about, we want personal information as well, or we want these and these data, tax data, whatever, in the basic data program, it means that they already start to visualize what kind of interesting solutions that you can make. So we are on our way. Public sector. 40% of the respondents indicated that data will be of importance in terms of making it more efficiency. And 80% indicate that there is a saving potential using geodata. But this saving potential, there may be some saving potential within the normal environment technique sector, but where we really expect the savings and the efficiency to take place is within health, social security, completely different sectors where geodata is not used so often in Denmark. It is used, but it's not used so intelligently yet. And then in the private sector, there has been some expectancy. Now this study is from last year. I think it's already now it's showing new signs, but there's expectation of 5.5% market growth, which is not overwhelming. But as I said, I think that it is much more widespread, and we have to bear in mind that the respondents that Deloitte was talking to, as I showed in the data strategy section, was the existing users. So we are expecting to see a lot of new users, and these respondents have not been asked yet because they were not really there in 2012. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, any questions? I saw you had a question. You raised your hand, but it was a camera, so. Yeah, you have one.
question about the registration. Switch up. Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the registration issue. I think that this is probably more cultural because it depends how much value people give to their personal data and how they perceive that giving data to government is safe enough. So this may vary from country to country. So I was wondering whether in your experience you had some feedback about possible incentives you can give in order to ask people to register, because you know another option is to ask for optional registration. So you say if you want to being able to provide feedback on the data, you have to register because you must know who you are, and not just to say registration is required just for downloading the data.
No, what we did was the module that we were using, we needed an email account. So we send an email when the data is ready to access. So what we did was just to say, okay, we need this email because otherwise you're not getting the data. But what we did was say, okay, you state your name. You have to say whether you are a private person or public sector, and in that case, which ministry you are in or municipality and so forth. And then we asked them, of course, to accept the licensing. They have to do that, that's mandatory, otherwise they're not getting the data. They have to accept the license. But then we made it optional whether we could contact them or not. So you register and you say, no, I'm not interested in getting any further information or questionnaires or anything from you, and then we won't get back to the users, except when they're asking for data. But what we found was that more than 30% of the users actually said, fine, no problem with me. We would like to have more information on one side, and on the other side, yes, we would like to be interviewed if you need some additional information. So it is optional whether we actually contact them. And the only information, real information that should be valid that we are having is actually the email account. Otherwise, they're not getting the data.
Thanks. Really, many thanks for very impressive information and facts. 2 points I'd like to ask you. First one, is this study somehow, or will be somehow available, just to have a look on what was collected in addition? And the second question was, you mentioned that you were or you are planning to go back to those users. Did you already receive some feedback? Was it 50% of the reactions on some surveys, or it's still on the wish list to do this feedback with the already registered users?
Okay, can I have the first question again? I didn't quite.
Maybe also I didn't. You mentioned that there was some study or done by Deloitte.
Yeah.
Will this study be somehow accessible?
Oh, yeah. Okay. The study, I should have said that. The study is accessible on our homepage now. So if you... I'll send a paper down here with the email account. You can just go in. It's a Danish report, but there is an English synopsis as well. So there you can read about the studies and more information about how it was done. And the second question was, sorry? The
feedback from the registered users.
Yeah. Well, it was I can't remember the statistics correctly, but I think it was around 75% that said, okay, we are satisfied with the data. They met our expectations. But then the percentage kind of lowered when you said, okay, did you find it very accessible? And there was some feedback on metadata. They would have liked to have more easily access to the metadata. What we're having in the licensing is that people have to state when they're using our data. They can use it free commercially, however they want, but if they're using it somewhere, they have to say they have to state the licensing, saying, okay, this is the data from the Danish Geodata Agency, and this is not so much for branding purposes, but it's more than that users have to go back, have to be able to go back and see, okay, where's the data from? They have to state which type of data set are we talking about, and when was it last updated. Because when we are working with cadastral information, for instance, it is very important for the users that they know which kind of version are we working on here. So they have to, that is in the licensing that they have to do that.
Yeah. One last question.
Tina, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. Very useful. And yes, do please share a link to the English summary of the Deloitte report, because at the moment I can't find it on your website, but
okay.
I would like to, please, because in my work I constantly have to come up with new examples of how open data has helped, and this one now replaces or rather updates the one I've been quoting for the last 6 months, which is the Deloitte report on how return on investment for London Transport was between 15 and 58 times. So thank you for that. I'm interested, actually, I think Deloitte has just maybe got themselves a new job here. I'd love to see a report in future on comparing the licensing and access terms you've just been describing, whether that actually has an effect.
Yeah.
Because what you're describing does not count as open data. It counts as open-ish, and I wonder whether that's actually enough, whether it's open enough.
And
but
why,
it doesn't
why
match the open data definition.
And why don't you consider it as open data?
Because you have to register, because you have to give an email address,
so
because you have to tell them why you want it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not open data. It's obviously very valuable and fantastic, but it doesn't fit the definition. So is the definition wrong? Are we too worried about openness? Or, so what effect? I wonder how you would ever find out what percentage of people have been put off by the fact they have to register.
Yeah, I think, well, as the first person mentioned, that it probably there is a cultural difference in different countries whether this actually have an meaning or well. So a pan-European study probably wouldn't give a very good. I think probably what could be as interesting is to look at the licensing and see what kind of license is used. Because what we did in the Danish case was to go to Finland and say, open data, they just opened up a few months before us. How did you go about it? Because we wanted something that was specific on geodata. And then we got some very good impact from the Finnish National Mapping Agency. We went back and talked with the Minister of Finance and the other data owners that had to open up data in the basic data program. And what we basically did was to take the lawyers out of the room, because we wanted to have a licensee that people can understand. That's back to the accessibility part. So what we did was that we made a common, within the basic data program, a common licensing. There's some specific things for geodata, but a common licensing that is fairly, I can say, fairly easy to read and understand. So there's no problem between comparing different types of licensing between the different data sets and so forth. And then, of course, eventually, I have to say, we took the lawyers back into the room and they accepted it. But
yeah, I think we have to thank Tina once more. Again, for an interesting and stimulating presentation. Although there was one issue which actually surprised me on Danish as Tina. So, but one thing is that we talked earlier about in the previous presentation that probably the economic crisis could be an obstacle against implementation of Inspire, and now we heard Tina say, okay, we invented open data in Denmark due to economic crisis. This is so perhaps should be a driver in some way. Yeah, are there only one speaker left? Okay, the other are not coming, so please come up. The last speaker. It is from Finnish Meteorological Institute. It's about opening meteorological data and using ODC standards, and it's Roope Tervo. Please, the floor is yours. I will find your presentation here. Roope Tervo is here. Yeah, please.
Thank you. And hello everyone. So I'm Roope Tervo from Finnish Meteorological Institute, and I'm going to represent you a little bit more concrete implementation of Open Meteorological Data Portal. Our Open Data Portal it follows OGC standards and Inspire directive. So we opened our data last year, and basically everything we own was opened, and data is provided in freely, although registration is also required, and in machine-readable formats. As I already said, Inspire directive is followed, so metadata services, data models, they all come from Inspire requirements. And it's actually the very same data portal which we use for Open Data and Inspire data portal. Here are some data sets, example of data sets which are provided in the portal. I'm not going to go this through in detail, but just to give you a scope of the data. Data there, it's quite vast. There are weather observations, marine observations, weather radars, lightnings, climatological observations and reference, weather forecast model covering whole Europe, sea forecast models. There's going to be aviation observations, METARs, ground and mast observations, air quality observations, some dispersion model output, soundings, and much more. So there's lots of content, and it's updating quite rapidly, and the data amount is huge. Quick glance about services. We have View service, it's based on J server, catalog service based on J network. As a download service, we use WFS 2.0. To be more accurate, we use 2.0 simple profile, which means that it's based on stored queries, predefined datasets with possibility for some additional parameters. For example, time can be chosen or area can be chosen. It's our in-house production. It's based on our own data server, which we use for our own production and our own clients also. Then about data models. Observations and point forecast are naturally GML, as Inspire require. But here the same data is published at the moment in two different kind of GML formats. I come back to that later. Before that, there's also notable that we have a huge data sets which need to be published in binary format, hundreds of gigabytes. There, that kind of gridded data is provided in appropriate binary format. In most cases, it's GRIP or GRIP2. It's a meteorological format, and NetGDF and HDF, and some others are also used somewhere. In those cases, those WFS members contains only metadata envelope with a link to actual binary data. But back to this data models. There's multi-point coverage format, the one we prefer. It's very complicated. The data there is separated into three different kind of XML elements. There are coverage, the actual points where data is provided defined in separate element, and the actual data in other element, and finally the parameters provided in third element. It's very complicated, but still it's compact, efficient. File size remains small, and it works well for many data types. But it's not intuitive, and there's no natural structure of XML, so XML tools don't work very well for the actual data. And it's not recommended in Inspire technical guidance. Then there's this Inspire compliant format. It's very simple. There's only one member which contains time series for one parameter and one location. It's simple, it's intuitive, easy to use. XSLT and XML tools works, but there's lots of repetition. There are large file size, and they are especially heavy for clients, and it doesn't work for all data types. But it's in Inspire. Not requirement. Actually, it is in Inspire requirements also. Here's some file size comparison. There's quite typical meteorological data set. 1/3 of Finland, around 140 observation stations, 11 parameters, and 12 hours of data with 10-minute time step. This measurement time series mentioned in Inspire, it takes about 53 megabytes of data, when this multi-point coverage uses only 1.8 megabytes of data. As you can see, this compresses very well, so it's not a question of bandwidth, but more question of CPU, and especially this is problematic for clients and users. There's also an old simple feature document model, data model here in comparison, which is even larger than these Inspire complex features. Still, this measurement time series is by far the most popular data model. It's probably because even though it's very large and it's maybe heavy for if you use much parameters, large areas, as we have used to use the data. But if you just need 1 point and 1 parameter, it's simple enough, and that's good. There you can also see that these binary formats are not very popular, but they are very complex, and you need special tools and special skills to use that. But it's anyway necessary, because if you want to all the data, you have to use these formats. Okay. We have also produced an open source JavaScript library to help users to load and use the data. We also produced some reference clients for an example to lower barrier for using data. This makes requests for you. They provide client-side cache, pass data from multiple cohorts from the first data model to JSON. At the moment, there's only JavaScript for web clients, but Python version is on the list also. It's open source, and it's free to use, and we also welcome everyone to contribute our development. We also require registration. We required it for view and download services. As in Denmark, we require working email, and there are optional fields like name and contact information and how you will use this data, but they are only optional information. And user need to accept a license here also. After registration, user gets an API key to her email, and then it needs to be added into all requests. It can be added in several ways, so it should be not a problem. And it's also notable that one can create several API keys with one email. So if you need many API keys, you don't have to create many email addresses with Gmail or anything. There's also some usage limits. With one API key, it's allowed to do at most 20,000 requests per day to a download service for downloading data, and at most 10,000 requests per day to a view service. And what's more, with one API key and actually from one IP address, you can do at most 600 requests per 5 minutes to both services. So one API key or one client with many API keys can't do any this kind of denial of service attacks or anything like that. Where these limits come from? If all observations, weather observations from one time step is calculated to as one, a little over 17,000 new data sets are published daily. So it's meant to be so that with one API key you can download everything once. But this open data portal is not meant to be as a backend of the clients. And same thing with the view service. You are free to develop against our view service, but it's not meant to be as a backend of WMS clients. If you want that, you need to keep your own backend. Some experiences. We have been open a little over a year now. At the moment we have a little over, or something between 5,000 and 6,000 registered users, and we get around 100,000 data downloads per day. So that means 1.2 requests per second. And these numbers are steadily increasing, and I believe these numbers will get much bigger in few years. This is quite complex domain, and services are not very easy to use, and especially this data is not too easy to use. So it takes some time for users to get familiar with these services and with this data. But there's been interest in it. As I've tried to illustrate you already before, there's a very significant gap between provided data model, between Inspire data model, and client's capabilities. At the moment, there's practically no clients or user interfaces with supports or libraries with supports complex features, which supports these Inspire data models from user point of view. This is a problem. We created this Metolib JavaScript library to solve this problem, but it's not enough alone. We need much more clients and libraries, more general libraries which support Inspire data formats. But before that, we have seen necessary to publish the same data as the simple features to support these old, at the moment, existing clients. And we have also modified share server to support stored queries in WFS2, so that this our WFS can be used directly behind the share server. These modifications will be integrated into the server standard package in next version or version after that. Again, about services and data models. From open data point of view, you can't satisfy everyone. Amateurs, freelancer coders, and many simple web page developers would prefer simple JSON API or REST API or something very simple, very easy. But on the other hand, industry and larger companies are very happy to use these standardized services because they are using that anyway. This is also a question about if you are familiar with the geodata or not, because these are used in georeference context, but not in other contexts, these services and also bit data models. For now, point forecast and observations are the most interesting data types. We get most downloads for them. It's maybe a little bit surprised that radar images are not that interesting, but we get a lot of downloads for radar images also. And for now, there have been very few interest in forecast models as binary data. As I said, it's complicated data. You need special skills, special tools to use that data, and its volume is huge. But anyway, it's very valuable for those who need it. So it needs to be there. Finally, this Open Data project has been a great boost also for ourselves in both technically and working culture point of view. And finally, we have all the data behind one access point and behind standard interfaces and in a harmonized format for ourselves also. It's new to ourselves also, and it's a great advantage. So I recommend this kind of project to everyone. It's been a great project. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah. Thank you very much. One of the last speakers just showed up, so therefore I was a bit confused here. I think that we have maximum room. We have room for one or two questions. Yes.
My name is Christian Fischer from Septimed in Denmark. I would like to ask you, why do you have these limitations on your services? Have you tried just mentioning that the end user has to use it fairly and describe what fairly is, and then perhaps close those users who are not complying to this fairness of use? Why do you have the limitations? And when did you observe some problems before you implemented the limitations?
Kind of from our own usage, we have seen that it's very easy to block everyone else out with wrong kind of client. So we want to ensure that everyone can download the actual data, so that one user can't block everyone else out. Anyway, these limits are so loose that anyone can download practically everything. As you saw, the data content is very vast, and this 17,000, practically no one is interested in every data set. So everyone should be able to download everything he or she needs.
Yeah, I think we have to move on because the last speaker has just shown up, and but thank you once again. I think it's the first example of methodological open data as wide as you have proposed. I think it hopefully can be stimulating for some others. Yeah. Thank you. And the final speaker, do we have an on?
Can you just?
I don't think it's so easy.
I think not. I shouldn't try it.
You don't have a stick with it, or?
No, but I can.
Okay, you're welcome to try.
Let's give it a try.
Yeah.
Let's see if it works. Yep, it does work. All right, thanks very much. Apologies for that. There seemed to be a mix also with the names. The last gentleman on this long list of names, I'm Prodromos Tsiavos. I'm not Panayotis, who for some reason is mentioned on the project, on the program. What I will try to do, with respecting the fact that we're very close to the break, is talk to you about the effort that we are doing as part of a Euromed project, Homer project, to actually implement an open data policy and inspire policy in 13 Mediterranean regions. This is the Homer project. And this has been a particularly relevant experience for this group here, precisely because we are constantly facing the issue of how do we reconcile two things within a single project. And these two things, on the one hand, have to do with the sharing of data amongst administrations, which seems to be one of the key focuses of the Inspire implementation in quite a few countries, and having a lot of heavy standards to follow, which is pretty much what Inspire does, and an open data approach, which tends to be much more lightweight. And while the two are complementary in quite a few instances, they may seem to have to raise issues. So I'll just go with you quickly over an overview of the project, and then focus on a couple of issues we have, and we are actually overcoming right now. And I would be very interested in whether you have similar types of experiences. So the scope of the project is pretty much 19 partners. They are mostly regional territories, and 6 are support actors. So they tend to be universities or companies belonging to the regions, or they are associations of companies or associations of universities. What is the primary objective of the project is to actually create a federation of open data. So we have different portals, open data portals in the different regions, and these portals are actually produce different types of data, and we have 5 specific areas we're interested in. That is agriculture, culture, energy, environment, and tourism. And the idea is to provide to have these data sets on the regional websites or decentralized regional administration websites, and then through APIs, data portals, not websites, data portals, and then through APIs to actually harvest this data in the central federation, which is actually run by CSI, which is the Italian partner, which actually gathers all this data and then makes them available. So and what happens in the project is you have these different areas, and each partner is interested in following these different areas and exposes data of that kind. And then there are certain events which highlight the relevance of such data. And we've done a number of hackathons. We had our latest hackathon just a month ago, which was what happened across the different partners. And I think this was also a very important experience, because it showed us which of our data were relevant and which were not. The Homer project, to a great extent, was driven by the Piedmont region, because they had more experience than the rest of the partners. And the Piedmont region was also the one that actually was running the aggregation service. So it seems also that the most mature partners were the ones that were driving the process, and there was a lot of knowledge transfer between the different partners in the different meetings. There were two important features here. Is that the CSI, the Piemonte CSI, was the one that actually was responsible for the work package that did collect did the harvest of various data, and they also designed with CELI a solution that could actually harvest the data from the different sites, and we used Eurovoc as the primary tool in order to be implemented in the solution. Now, what is interesting is that the organization that actually makes the collection operates both as a developer and as a promoter of the use. So you have certain features which were mostly having to do with the software development, and certain features that had to do with the promotion of the technology. What was also interesting was that in order to make sure that the different partners could follow and they could ascertain a certain level of openness and commitments, we had a memorandum of understanding which was separate from the consortium agreement, so as to ensure the viability of the project once the project was completed. And again here, what is interesting, the very last bullet, is that we used the data set were exposed through APIs, and it was very interesting that we had 2 basic solutions. One was CCAN based, and another one was a custom made developed by Piemonte. Now here, this is a quite important point here. How many of you are implementing a CCAN type of infrastructure in your organization? No. Now, the thing is that if you go to an open data crowd, you see that a lot of administrations or organizations implement CKAN, which is quite problematic when you try to use it in the Inspire context, precisely because you cannot really do much with the metadata. And this has caused a lot of trouble in the context of the organization, of the consortium. So right now, we have managed to develop a CKAN instance which actually is Inspire compliant. But this has actually taken us a lot of time and a lot of negotiations, and there was also a lack of, there was a difference in terms of there was a cultural rift between the different organizations that really wanted to open up the data, and they just didn't care about the metadata that much. They just wanted to expose the data, and there were other organizations that were very much focused on how do you actually are compliant with the Inspire regulations. So I think this was pretty much an important point of tension that we have seen. In terms of the cross-lingual search, we implemented, again, a Eurovoc-based solution, and this has actually gained us quite a bit of time. Now, the thing is that through the different events that we have made over the last 2 years, we have managed to expose quite a number of data sets. What I think is the most instrumental part of this effort was the fact that we managed to have hackathons where we involved several layers of the local, let's say, ecosystems. So the most successful cases where the hackathons actually had an effect, whereas where we had the decentralized administration, the regional government, a university or research center, and a certain amount of companies and local developers. And in cases where we had that, we managed to have some results from the hackathons, and we managed to have these results seen working in practice quite fast. 2 examples from what happened in the Crete hackathon, which was the latest one, is the first one. They managed to develop really quickly an application which would actually allow companies to make applications for environmental impact assessments. So it actually accelerated a lot the process. It's still run as a pilot, but this has shown that this is something that would normally cost some hundreds of thousands to go through the tendering process and build the whole thing, to be done really, really rapidly. And the second quite relevant was something that we saw in most of the hackathons, which was combination of geodata with different pricing data and information from the central government. What we also found as quite frustrating in quite a few cases was that there was a kind of an acoustic separation between the central administration and the regional administration. So the regional administration may wanted to have released certain data sets, but they didn't have the competency. So I think this is really an issue in the countries where all the competencies with regards to the opening up of the data are located within the central administration. What happens when the regional administration is a bit more advanced and wishes both to implement Inspire obligations even more than the central administration, but also to release more data sets. So there is a lack of leverage when you try to do things at the regional level, which often leads to kinds of to impasses. Now, the whole idea of the OMER project is to create this federation and make sure that the data are exposed. Is very much focused on the regional level, but the idea is to always invite new stakeholders. The administrative structure behind it was the MOU, which we think is quite open, so it allows different types of partners to join throughout the project, but also after the project is completed. And the question here is that, again, what is the incentive for someone to join this platform? What are the benefits? So we're working a lot in providing guidelines and action plans, both for the local and regional governments, but also for private players that wish to expose their data or use their data, and also trying to create technical solutions which are actually really usable. Whether this is going to be successful or not, we still have 1.5 years to see. Now, I wanted to stop with some conclusions, but I think there are more questions than conclusions. The first one is whether there should be some kind of common management between open data portals and geodata portals. And what we see in quite a few cases is that there seem to be two separate policies, and also this has to do with the administrative structure. Ministries of Environment normally are the ones which are responsible for the INSPIRE directive implementation, and central government is responsible for that. Whereas with open data, you have a lot of push from the EU to actually, from the EC to actually go at the regional level, and you also have lots of regional portals. At the same time, you have ministries of administrative reform being responsible for the open data, and ministries of environment or the cadastral responsible for the INSPIRE, which is a mess. So this is basically the problem we have, and this mess is expressed everywhere. It's expressed in the way the regulations are built, the ministerial degrees are built, the technologies are chosen, the interoperability decisions are being made. When you tell to the open data people that you want to go for INSPIRE metadata, they tell you it's too heavy. When you go to the INSPIRE people and tell them try to tone it down, you're not obliged to do the whole thing, try to go with as much as the regulations oblige, they tell you this is too scrappy. So you always have to balance between the two, and the fact that there is a lack of competencies at the regional and local level makes it even more difficult. So if there is one conclusion to put here, is that there is an urgent need for closer collaboration between an alignment both of European policies and implementation measures between open data and INSPIRE. And I'll just put one final thing here. When we did the INSPIRE implementation in Greece, and I have another presentation on this one, we placed particular efforts in the complete life cycle. So from the moment you actually get the data to how you share and how they're being brought out. And this is, I think quite a few countries have adopted a similar approach. What happens with open data, the classic legislation, which is the new directive, the 2013-37, it basically focuses on how you expose data. So it's at the latest stage. They don't care how you share, they don't care how you obtain the rights for the data. And that's yet another reason why there is a disparity between the two. So I'll leave you with these thoughts. There are more, I know they're quite troubling for just before the break. And the floor is open for questions.
Okay, thank you. Luckily, you're a fast speaker, so you managed to have a 15-minute presentation in 10. So, I think we can have just one question if there's any. Or are you coffee, tea, Thursday?
Coffee starving.
Otherwise, I think you can meet
Prodromos.
Speaker during the coffee break. Once again, I will thank all the speakers and also the audience for very nice, interesting questions.